Right now, inside Arsenal's recruitment department, 3 names are sitting on a board and only one of them is realistic. Sandro Tonali, Bruno Guimarães, Alex Scott. One window is closing fast on Tonali, one door with Newcastle is being tested without anyone officially knocking, and one move that looked like a bargain has just been slammed shut by Bournemouth. At the same time, on the pitch, 2 separate storylines are colliding. England's biggest attacking weapon is being watched with concern by 2 of the most respected voices in English football. And a Swedish striker who Arsenal fans were told to worry about all season is sitting in a press conference talking about his Arsenal teammates with what sounds suspiciously like loyalty. This is the moment where you separate noise from signal. So let's go through exactly what is confirmed, what is being floated, and what is simply not happening anymore. If Arsenal get the midfield reinforcement wrong this summer, Declan Rice goes into another season without a long-term partner, and that gap has already been flagged publicly by people inside the England setup. If the Tonali situation drags on, Arsenal risk watching a direct competitor in Tottenham complete a deal for a player who was once offered to them first. If the Bruno Guimarães approach stays informal for too long, Newcastle's stance hardens further, and the price only goes up. And if Ben White's recovery and exit talk run in parallel without a clear direction from the club, Arsenal could be left short at right back heading into a season where Timber and White have both already shown fragility. None of this is catastrophic on its own, but stacked together, it is the kind of summer where hesitation becomes the story. If you want this kind of detail every single day of the transfer window, this is exactly the channel for that. Hit that subscribe button now, because what comes next involves Bruno Guimarães, Julian Alvarez, and a release clause situation in Portugal that nobody is talking about loudly enough yet. Let's start with Viktor Gyökeres, because his words matter more than people are giving them credit for. The Post reads, Gyokeres responds to transfer speculation amid Atletico Madrid links. When asked about these links, he said, of course it's flattering to see that clubs are interested, but I feel extremely comfortable at Arsenal. After the season we have had, I only have positive feelings. When quizzed on how he handles these claims during the World Cup, Gyökeres explained, nothing. I'm here, have a fairly important match, and that is the main focus. Here is what I take from that. This is not the language of a player engineering an exit. Players who want to force a move usually leave just enough ambiguity in their answers to keep the door open publicly. Gyökeres did not do that. He used the word comfortable, he referenced a positive season, and he immediately pivoted away from the transfer talk toward his international football. If Atletico Madrid are genuinely circling him as part of any deal involving Julian Alvarez, the player himself is not currently behaving like someone who wants out. That is a contrast that matters when we get to the Alvarez situation later, because that swap proposal only works if Gyökeres is willing, and right now his own words are not supporting that willingness. Next, still Gyökeres, still pre-tournament but a different subject. Viktor Gyökeres on facing William Saliba. He is quoted as saying, "It will be fun to meet him again. We have a good relationship." He is an extremely funny guy who contributes a lot of energy. A guy you want to have around you, a good and important person to have in the locker room. On whether Saliba might be anxious about facing him, Gyokeres simply says, "You'll have to ask him." And on their last meeting, he adds, "Yeah, it felt good last time, but it was a while ago and we'll see on Tuesday. I'm looking forward to playing against him." This is a small moment, but it tells you something about the internal culture Arteta has built. A new signing in his first season is publicly describing a teammate in glowing terms, unprompted, in what is essentially an international media duty interview. That is not something clubs can manufacture. Either the locker room dynamic is genuinely healthy, or Gyokeres is being extremely diplomatic. Given the tone of his other answer about feeling comfortable at Arsenal, I am inclined to read this as consistent, not coincidental. Now to a confirmed fixture. Arsenal will face Como 1907 in a pre-season friendly on Wednesday, August 12th at Emirates Stadium, with kick-off at 7:30 in the evening, UK time. The detail that elevates this beyond a routine friendly is who is currently managing Como. It is Cesc Fabregas, the former Arsenal captain. This is confirmed, official and dated. There is no ambiguity here. What is worth analysing is the symbolism. A pre-season friendly against a club managed by a legend of the institution is the kind of fixture that generates goodwill, ticket sales and a feel-good moment before a serious campaign begins. It also gives Arteta a low-stakes opportunity to test new signings and returning players from the World Cup in a competitive but ultimately low-risk environment, against a manager who knows the club's DNA intimately. Nothing tactical to extract yet, but worth flagging on the calendar, moving to an England matter that touches Arsenal directly. Paul Scholes believes Elliot Anderson should start ahead of Declan Rice, claiming Rice struggled to get Martin Odegaard into games for Arsenal last season. Scholes on the Good, the Bad and the Football podcast says England don't need to play two sitting midfielders in the next game. No disrespect to Congo, but in those type of games you play as many attackers as possible. I think it has to be a straight shootout between Declan Rice and Elliot Anderson, and I think I would just go with Anderson. He continues, I think he will pass it forward a bit more. Think about Rice with Arsenal. Look, he's a great player and a great leader. I get all that, and you'd rather him in your team than not most of the time. But Arsenal didn't play great football last season either, did they? Rice couldn't get Odegaard in the game, so maybe that's transferred a bit to England. I don't think that happens with Anderson. I want to be precise about what this is and what it isn't. This is Paul Scholes' opinion, delivered on a podcast, about an England selection decision. It is not a report of an Arsenal transfer or an internal Arsenal stance. But it is still relevant to Arsenal supporters because it directly references Rice's club form and his relationship with Odegaard in possession. The specific claim is that Rice, in an Arsenal shirt last season, did not get enough forward passes into Odegaard, and Scholes is suggesting that pattern has carried into the national team setup. Whether you agree with the football logic or not, it is a public, named critique of how Rice's distribution affected one of Arsenal's most important creative players. That is the kind of detail that tends to follow a player into the new season, especially if Arsenal's midfield business this summer is, as we will see, still unresolved. Now into the recruitment side, starting with the most contested midfield asset in this update. Newcastle United have rejected a £45 million intermediary proposal for Bruno Guimarães, with Arsenal yet to make any official club-to-club approach. The Magpies have made it clear the Brazilian is not for sale, although Arsenal continue to monitor his situation. Newcastle are also prepared to offer Bruno an improved contract, but his priority is the club's long-term project rather than salary. Source, Chronicle Live. Break this down carefully, because the wording is doing a lot of work. An intermediary proposal is not the same as a club bid. Arsenal have not gone to Newcastle directly. Newcastle have rejected something that was, by definition, informal. And critically, the report states Bruno's own priority is the project at Newcastle, not the money. That last detail is significant because it tells you this is not simply a question of Arsenal meeting a valuation. If the player himself is currently motivated by project loyalty rather than salary, that is a much harder barrier to move than a transfer fee. Arsenal can write a cheque. They cannot necessarily write a sense of unfinished business at Newcastle. The very next piece adds a number to that picture. Chronicle Live understands that Arsenal thinks £65 million could be enough to trigger a sale for Bruno Guimarães. There has been no club-to-club contact with Newcastle, and all the conversations are taking place via intermediaries. So here is the state of play in one clean sentence. Arsenal have an internal valuation point of £65 million. They have tested the waters informally at a lower figure of £45 million through intermediaries. That lower offer was rejected, and there has still been no direct official contact between the two clubs. This is very early stage interest, not an advanced negotiation. Anyone telling you Bruno Guimarães is close to Arsenal right now is getting ahead of what is actually confirmed. Centre-back depth is the next thread. Arsenal are monitoring William Saliba's condition closely, waiting to see how he feels after the World Cup. It is also noted that Arsenal have made checks on numerous centre-backs, including Maxence Lacroix and Ezri Konsa, among others. This is a depth and contingency story, not an active negotiation story. The phrase making checks is well below the threshold of a bid or a formal approach. What it tells us is that Arsenal's recruitment department is doing its due diligence on alternatives in case Saliba's post-tournament condition becomes a concern, or in case the club decides it needs rotation cover regardless. Maxence Lacroix and Ezri Konsa are both established Premier League defenders, which suggests Arsenal are prioritising players who would need minimal adaptation time if a move were to progress. But again, this is monitoring, not movement. Attack now and a specific number attached to a specific target. Arsenal are preparing an opening offer to Aston Villa for the signing of Morgan Rogers this summer. It is expected the Gunners will have to pay upwards of an £80 million fee if they want to sign the 23-year-old. This is one of the more advanced pieces of business in this entire update because it specifies an opening offer is being prepared, not just interest being monitored. £80 million for a 23-year-old attacker is a serious financial commitment, and it tells you Arsenal view Rodgers as a primary attacking target rather than a depth option. The fact that a figure is already being floated as the likely entry point rather than a final price also suggests Aston Villa's valuation could climb higher before any deal is concluded, which is typical when a buying club's opening offer is reported before a single pound has actually changed hands. Now to the most detailed single source in this update, a long thread laying out Arsenal's entire midfield search step by step. As far as is known, this is what has been going on. Arsenal were interested in Fernandes, Tonali and Pablo Barrios, described as an exclusive. When Tonali was offered to Arsenal at the end of January, it piqued everyone's interest at the club. Berta kept in contact, as did Manchester City. It became clear the deal was not feasible due to Newcastle wanting £85 million or even more, and the agent fees being described as incredible. Barrios was not available for several reasons. Fernandes is heavily involved with Jorge Mendes, and it quickly became apparent there would be a bidding war at a minimum of £85 million, with the stated line, whoever pays the most can have him. Berta then made contact multiple times to explore the situation of Alex Scott, with the interest described as real, and a feeling that a potential bargain could be secured around £65 million. Bournemouth began to panic while Alex Scott was out in the United States with the England pre-camp, and want to rush to secure a renewal for Scott with a possible release clause. Their stance currently is that he is not for sale at any price. On Bruno Guimarães specifically, the thread clarifies that Berta made contact with his camp via an intermediary referred to as Kia. A loose offer below £60 million was floated to Newcastle via these middlemen to understand their appetite for any deal. Newcastle say he is not for sale. The thread adds a pointed note, Kia being involved is something every Arsenal fan should be aware of, suggesting some caution around how that channel operates. It states that when an offer is serious, it is officially submitted to the club, hence Newcastle having had no contact from Arsenal as of 9 in the morning. Newcastle will not lose both of their midfielders, so maybe Berta tried a cheeky offer before the Tonali deal has gone through. Until a serious offer is presented or the budget changes, the situation is described simply as, we wait. Finally, the thread mentions Arsenal have contacted the likes of Boadi and Cohn and others not yet being discussed, adding that no one else is providing these step-by-step updates and that it is incredibly exhausting. The personal view offered is that Boadi or Bruno would be incredible. There is a lot to unpack here, so let me give you the clean version of Arsenal's midfield summer in order. First, Tonali was offered to Arsenal back in January, but Newcastle's valuation of £85 million or more, combined with heavy agent fees, made it unworkable, and Manchester City were also circling. Second, Pablo Barrios was simply not available, for reasons not specified. Third, Fernandes is tied closely to a powerful agency network, and any move for him is shaping up as a straight financial bidding war with no loyalty discount. Fourth, Alex Scott looked like the value play of the summer at around £65 million, until Bournemouth panicked and pulled the door shut, declaring he is not for sale at any price while they push through a new contract with a release clause. Fifth, and this is the one to watch most closely, the Bruno Guimarães interest is real but still informal, running through an intermediary, with Arsenal testing appetite below £60 million, while their internal valuation, as we saw from the Chronicle Live information, sits closer to £65 million. And sixth, there are quiet earlier stage inquiries about Boadi and Cohn that have not developed into anything substantial yet. If you string all of that together, the picture of Arsenal's midfield strategy this summer is not one of confusion, it is one of patience bordering on caution. Every avenue that required an immediate overpay, Tonali at £85 million plus, Fernandes in a bidding war, has been quietly stepped back from. The club appears to be waiting for either a valuation to drop or a player's stance to shift, rather than forcing a deal at inflated prices. Right-back depth is the next concern, and it comes from a slightly different angle, a fan account question rather than a formal report, but it reflects a real squad situation. The question posed is whether Arsenal should pick up Oscar Mingueza on a free transfer to strengthen their right-back depth, framed around the fact that Ben White is injured, Timber is injured, and Mosquera has to come in. I want to flag this for what it is. This is presented as a discussion prompt, not a confirmed Arsenal target or an active negotiation. But the underlying squad fact embedded in that question is real and consistent with other information in this update, specifically that both Ben White and Jurrien Timber have fitness issues, which puts pressure on Christian Mosquera to cover right back in their absence. Whether Mingueza specifically becomes a serious target is not something I can confirm from this, but the depth concern itself is legitimate and echoed elsewhere. Which brings us to William Gomes. Arsenal remain among the clubs monitoring Porto winger William Gomes. However, new Porto manager Francesco Farioli has reportedly made it clear he wants the 20-year-old to stay, with the club expected to demand a fee close to his €80 million release clause. No official bids have been received so far. Source Correio da Manhã. This is a classic monitoring situation with a built-in obstacle. Arsenal are watching, but the new manager at Porto has already drawn a line in the sand, wanting to build around Gomes rather than sell him. With a release clause sitting close to €80 million and no official bids logged yet, this is a long way from movement. If anything, the public stance from Farioli makes this look like one of the more difficult targets on Arsenal's radar right now. Not because of Arsenal's intent, but because of Porto's resistance. Now, Ben White again, but from a different source with more context. Ben White's situation at Arsenal is one to keep an eye on. Everton were keen earlier, and there have been inquiries from elsewhere too. His injury has slowed any movement, but should a suitable offer come in and White like the look of the project, he could still leave this summer. Source, Hand of Arsenal. This confirms and expands what we saw in the Mingueza discussion. Ben White is genuinely a doubt for his Arsenal future this summer, not because Arsenal are actively pushing him out, but because his injury has paused any momentum on inquiries that already existed from Everton and other unnamed clubs. The phrase "should a suitable offer come in" tells you this is conditional on external interest materializing into something formal, and on White himself being convinced by an alternative project. Combine this with the right-back depth question from Mingueza, and you have a coherent picture. Arsenal's right-back position is genuinely unsettled heading into the new season, with White's future uncertain and Timber's fitness also in question. Finally on the screenshots, England's tournament and Bukayo Saka. Gary Neville and Ian Wright raised concerns over Bukayo Saka's fitness ahead of England's FIFA World Cup round of 32 clash. Gary Neville says, "Bukayo Saka doesn't look right at all. He's usually the boy that's bubbling and smiling, but he's not right, and that's a concern." Ian Wright adds, "He still isn't looking like the Saka that we know. This guy needs a break." Both also stress that England's wide players must improve heading into the knockout stages. Source, Mail Sport. This is squad welfare information rather than transfer information, but for an Arsenal channel it carries real weight. Saka is one of Arsenal's most important attacking players, and two of the most credible voices in English football, both former players turned analysts, are independently flagging a visible change in his demeanour and sharpness. Neville's comment about Saka usually being bubbling and smiling and now not being right is a specific, observable claim, not vague punditry. Ian Wright's call for him to get a break reinforces that this is being read as fatigue or some form of dip rather than a one-off bad performance. For Arsenal, the relevance is simple. Whatever happens with England at this World Cup, the condition Saka returns in for pre-season, and whether he gets the rest period Wright is suggesting he needs, will matter enormously for how Arteta manages his minutes at the start of next season.